I'm dirty, poor, barely alive," she whispered. "But if you'll have me, I'll be your wife." What does a woman have left when she's lost her home, her name, and the right to be looked in the eye? Clara Mae had nothing, no shoes, no food, no past worth speaking of. And when she collapsed at the gate of a stranger's ranch, she didn't ask for charity. She offered herself, not for love, not even for safety, but because something deep inside her refused to die. Would you make that offer? Would you trade your pride for one more night of shelter, knowing the man you offer yourself to might be just as broken? This is not just a tale of hardship. It's about two souls wounded, weary, weathered by life, learning to build a home not from bricks, but from grace, patience, and quiet kindness. If this speaks to something in you, please like, subscribe, and tell me, have you ever had to ask for something you didn't think you deserved? Now, come with me.
Let's begin where her voice cracked and a hardened rancher chose to listen. A woman, gaunt, filthy, barefoot, collapsed at the gate of Wade Callahan's ranch. Her voice cracked as she whispered words no man would expect from a stranger. It was near sundown, and the dust hung in the air like it had nowhere better to be. The wind had died down, but the heat of the day clung to the land like sweat to skin. Wade Callahan stood on his porch, shirt half buttoned, boots worn and scuffed with the quiet ache of years gone by. He'd just finished checking the corral when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a coyote slumped low and slow, dragging itself along the fence line. But then the figure moved again, closer, and he realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was a woman, thin as a fence post, her dress torn, layered with mud and road grit, her skin sunburnt and blistered in places where fabric had long given up. She reached the gate with the last of her strength, her hand gripping the weathered post for balance. Then she dropped, just folded into the ground like her bones had turned to dust. Wade didn't move right away. He stared, eyes narrowed. This land didn't see many visitors, and the ones who did come were usually lost or dangerous, or both. But then she looked up. Her eyes were hollow, but they held something more powerful than fear need. Raw, desperate need. Her mouth parted, and in a rasp barely louder than the wind, she said, "I'm dirty, poor, barely alive, but if you let me stay, I'll be your wife." Wade didn't answer, didn't blink. He stood there, arms at his sides, heart caught in the strange hush that followed her words. He hadn't heard a voice in days, and he certainly hadn't heard those words in years. A part of him buried deep twitched, not out of desire, not even out of pity, but something closer to recognition. A voice that familiar sounded like something from another life. He stepped off the porch, slow, one foot after the other, the wood creaking behind him like it didn't want to let him go. As he got closer, the details of her state came into view. Her lips were cracked, her hair matted, blood at one heel, where she must have stepped on rock, a piece of cloth tied tight around her upper arm, dried with what looked like days-old mud. She didn't look up again, didn't speak. Maybe she didn't have the strength. Wade stood over her, quiet, still. He could have turned her away. Should have. Maybe. He'd learned the hard way that people carried more than just dirt on their backs. They carried trouble, and sorrow, and needs that a man alone couldn't fix. But then he remembered something. A night, a knock on his own door. Years ago, when he still had someone to hold and someone to hold him. And he remembered what it felt like when no one opened that door. Without a word, Wade crouched down. He slid one arm under her back, the other beneath her legs. She was lighter than he expected, like wind-blown straw. She didn't resist. Her head rested against his shoulder as though her body had already decided to surrender. He carried her past the gate. The hinges creaked open, the same way they always had, but that day it sounded different, like the land itself had taken a breath. He didn't bring her into the house. Instead, he laid her gently on the bench just outside the bunkhouse, where the evening air still moved, soft and tired. He fetched a canteen from the well-post and brought it back, tilted it slow to her lips. She drank, then coughed, then drank again. Wade sat beside her, not close, not far, his arms crossed, eyes watching the fading sun. She whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, just once, then looked away. The silence stretched like the land around them wide, endless, patient. Inside, something stirred, something he hadn't let move in a long while. A memory, a thought. What kind of woman offers herself just for a place to sleep, and what kind of man doesn't ask why? But Wade didn't speak those thoughts. He let them sit, just like she now sat between two places, not belonging fully to either. After a few minutes, he stood. "You can rest here tonight," he said. Then he walked away, back toward the house, the screen door slamming behind him with a sharp clack. The gate had opened, but his heart, not yet. That night, the wind picked up again, and in the faint rustle of the grass and timber, Clara lay still between earth and sky, wondering if she'd ever feel warm again. A man can offer a roof without offering kindness, and Wade made that distinction clear. The morning light broke slow and pale over the hills, as if even the sun wasn't sure it wanted to rise. The ranch was quiet save for the occasional creak of wood and the restless huff of the horses behind the barn. Wade Callahan rose early, same as always, but today felt different. Not in what he did, just in what he noticed. The woman was still there. He hadn't expected her to stay the night. Thought maybe she'd crawl off before dawn, like some coyote with nothing left to lose. But when he stepped out with a pail of feed and looked toward the bench, he saw her still curled beneath the wool blanket, motionless. He hesitated, then walked past her. The barn door groaned open. Chickens scattered in a flurry of feathers and noise. The world turned again, same as ever. And Wade, like always, moved through it like a man too used to silence. When he returned, she was awake, barely. Her eyes fluttered open, slow and sluggish. She tried to sit up, failed. Tried again, one elbow pushing into the wood like it might hold her together. Wade didn't help. He set a tin cup of water on the porch rail near her feet. "There's an old tool shed out back," he said, voice flat. "Ain't much, but it's got 4 walls." Clara blinked at him. Her lips were cracked, the skin around her eyes raw from dust and sun. She nodded. Once. Not in thanks, just to say she understood. Wade didn't wait. He turned and walked, boots kicking up fine silt as he led her around the side of the house. The shed sat near the windmill, low, square, with a single window that hadn't had glass in years. It smelled of dry wood and mouse droppings, but the roof didn't leak, and the floor was mostly level. He pushed the door open and stepped back. She looked inside. No mattress, no chair, just a pile of old feed sacks and a small bench shoved against the wall. He dropped a folded blanket on top and stepped away. Then, almost as an afterthought, set down a canteen and a rusted tin bowl with a few chunks of cornbread. Still, he said nothing, and she followed him with her eyes as he walked away, tall, steady, unreadable. Inside the shed, the air felt heavier than outside. Clara leaned against the wall and slid to the floor. Her body was shaking now, though the air wasn't cold. It was hunger and fever, and maybe grief that clung like wet fabric and wouldn't dry out. She drank slowly from the canteen. The water was warm and metallic, but it was water. She ate half the cornbread before her stomach cramped, and she had to lie back down. She didn't cry. Not then. But her hands trembled as she tucked the blanket around her, and she whispered a name one not meant for anyone else to hear. Maybe it was her son's, or her sister's, or someone she once loved and lost long before this road began. The sun rose higher. Heat pooled inside the shed. By midday, her skin was slick with sweat, and her breath came shallow. Her body burned, then chilled, then burned again. She reached for the door once, maybe to call for help, maybe to leave, but her fingers wouldn't hold the handle. Outside, Wade worked the fence line. But he glanced at the shed more than once. Just glances. When the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the dirt, he approached the door again. Didn't knock, didn't speak. He just set down a shallow bowl of something, warm beans and carrots, mostly. And next to it, a small brown bottle. Unlabeled. But anyone who'd lived through hard winters in the West knew the look of laudanum. For pain. For fever. For surviving the night. He left it there, on the step, and walked away. Inside. Clara opened her eyes at the sound. She didn't get up, but she saw the bottle, and she knew. No kindness had been offered, but something had. Something small, quiet, human, and maybe that was enough for now. She rolled to her side, arms wrapped tight around her aching belly. The blanket stuck to her skin. Her eyes closed again, but her breath stayed steady this time. Then, in the silence, a whisper left her lips. Just keep breathing. Clara. If you're still breathing, you haven't lost yet. Outside, the wind picked up, and the ranch creaked softly beneath the weight of nightfall. Wade lit a lantern in his window. Clara saw it through the cracks in the shed wall, and, for the first time in days, she didn't feel entirely alone. You can tell a person's past from their hands. Wade's were rough. Clara's were scarred. The third morning came with a haze that softened the edges of the hills and blurred the line between earth and sky. Clara stirred in the tool shed, limbs heavy, head pounding with the dull ache of a fever retreating but not yet gone. She sat up slowly. The blanket clung to her back, damp with sweat. Her throat was dry, but she didn't reach for the canteen right away. Her eyes scanned the space around her. Still small, still musty, still hers for now. Outside, she heard the rhythmic scrape of a shovel and the hollow thud of boots on dirt. She pushed herself to standing. Each joint argued. Each step felt borrowed. But she moved, not because she felt strong, because she felt ashamed. No one had said she owed anything, but Clara had lived long enough to know that safety was never free, and nothing built faster than resentment when someone took without giving back. She stepped out into the morning air, squinting at the brightness. Her dress still hung in tatters. The sun kissed her arms with a sting, but she walked toward the barn, slow and steady, dragging a sense of purpose behind her like a heavy coat. Wade was outside the horse pen, mending a broken slat. He glanced up once when he heard her steps, then returned to his task. Clara paused, waited for a word, a nod, anything. But Wade kept working, jaw set, shoulders square. She turned and walked toward the lean-to where a stack of wash sat untouched. The water bucket was half full. She rolled up her sleeves. Her hands trembled as she dipped the cloth, rubbed, rinsed, wrung out. The motion was slow at first,
then steady, then automatic. She worked until her back ached. Then she moved to the stable, shoveling dung, sweeping hay, tying back bundles of feed. Each task carved a sliver of strength from her, but it also gave her a thread of dignity. Wade watched from a distance. He didn't offer help, didn't stop her, didn't say a word, but he saw. He saw the way she braced her knees before each lift, the way she bit her lip to keep from crying out, the way she wiped her brow and pressed forward like a soldier too stubborn to retreat. It was midday when Clara paused at the water trough. She rolled up her sleeves higher, bent down to wash her arms, and that's when Wade saw it. A long, thin scar, raised and pale, snaked across the back of her right arm just below the elbow, another crisscrossed near the shoulder. Faint, but unmistakable. Not the kind left by accident, the kind left by leather. Whip marks, old ones, healed, but never gone. Wade's hands, rough from fence work and years of holding reins, curled slightly at his sides. His breath hitched. He turned away. Not because he was disgusted, but because he wasn't sure what to do with the ache that bloomed in his chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was the realization that she had endured far more than hunger or heat, that whatever had brought her to his gate wasn't just bad luck. It was violence, sustained, and survived. Inside, a voice whispered something he didn't want to hear. You've been alone so long, you forgot what pain looked like on someone else. He shook his head and walked back to the porch. Behind him, Clara stood with the towel still in her hand. She had caught the glance, the flicker in his eyes before he turned away. And in her mind, it twisted. She didn't see understanding or sorrow, only the familiar sting of judgment. She wrapped her arms around herself, stepped back into the barn, and scrubbed the same wall twice just to keep moving. That night, she lay awake in the shed, staring up at the low ceiling. She ran her fingers over the scar, counted the ridges, like she used to count stars, one for every time she told herself she'd never beg again, one for every promise broken by someone else's hands. She closed her eyes and let the ache settle in. On the porch, Wade sat in the dark. A single lantern burned low beside him, and in the silence, he wondered if silence itself could ever be enough. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever could, and theirs was heavy. It wrapped around the ranch like the dust that clung to the windows, always there, always settling, no matter how often it was brushed away. Wade and Clara moved through the same spaces each day. She swept the porch in the early morning, careful not to make noise. He carried buckets to the trough before the heat rose too high. They passed within 10 feet of each other more than once, but no words crossed the air between them. It wasn't tension, not quite. It was more like distance, chosen, maintained, unspoken. For Clara, silence was familiar. It had followed her for years, through the back doors of saloons and in the corners of rented rooms where laughter was forced and men never stayed long enough to ask her name. But here, the silence was different. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was cautious, like an old dog watching from the porch steps, deciding whether to trust. Each morning she woke with the ache of half-healed bruises and the lingering heat of a fever not yet gone. But she rose. She walked. She worked. She didn't ask Wade for permission, and he never offered instruction. That alone was something. She spent her hours patching the edges of things, re-sewing a split feed bag, reinforcing a fence rail with rope, picking pebbles out of the chicken run. Her hands were clumsy some days, steadier on others, but always moving. Wade kept to his routine. Hammer, saddle, woodpile, repair, repeat.
He watched her sometimes, not obviously, not long, but enough to know she wasn't pretending to be useful. Still, they did not speak. Until the afternoon, she dropped the water bowl. It happened fast. The sun was high, and Clara had spent the past hour collecting used cloth from the barn. Her arms were full, and the metal basin was heavy with water. She'd carried it halfway to the shed when her foot caught on a rut. The basin tumbled from her grasp. It hit the dirt with a metallic clang, sloshing its contents across the dry ground, soaking her skirt and leaving a dark stain in the dust. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. And then, like someone had cut the strings holding her together. Clara sank to her knees and covered her face with both hands. The tears came without permission, not loud, not sharp, just quiet. Exhausted sobs, the kind that built slowly in the belly over days of swallowing down everything you never dared to say. She hadn't cried when she arrived, not when she saw the shed, not when her body gave out or her past walked behind her like a shadow. But a spilled bowl that somehow was the thing that cracked her. She didn't hear him approach, only knew he was there when his boot stopped just a few feet away. She wiped her eyes quickly, ashamed to be seen like this. Wade didn't speak. He bent down, picked up the empty basin, and handed her a clean one. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. That night, the silence between them changed. It didn't lift, but it loosened. Clara sat on the bench outside the shed, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars blinked in and out above her, and the air carried a softness not found during the day. She heard the porch creak. Wade stepped out, holding a mug of something warm. He didn't look at her right away, just leaned against the post, watching the moon rise. After a moment, he spoke. Used to be a boy who ran through this yard like his legs couldn't keep up with his heart. He said, his voice was quiet, worn. Clara turned toward him slightly, still silent. His name was Thomas. Wade continued, my son had my wife's eyes and her laugh, too. Loud, full of trouble. He took a sip from the mug. He'd chase the chickens until they stopped running. Think they got tired of humoring him. Smart birds. There was a pause. He got sick one winter. Nothing we did helped. Doctor came too late, and the snow just kept falling. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held weight, memory, grief. Clara's voice broke the quiet, low and unsure. I also, once, lost. She looked down at her lap. Her hands clenched the fabric of her skirt. She didn't say who, or when, or how. But Wade didn't press. He gave a small nod, then disappeared back into the house. The screen door swung shut behind him, and Clara remained on the bench, wrapped in stillness. But this time, the silence between them felt less like a wall, and more like a bridge. That night, as she curled up beneath her blanket, Clara stared through the cracks in the shed wall. She could see the faint glow from Wade's lantern, and for the first time in a long while, the dark didn't feel so lonely. Under the firelight, Clara told her truth, and Wade listened for the first time. The fire crackled low in the pit between them. Its orange glow danced across the dirt, casting shadows that flickered and faded like memories not yet ready to rest. The sky had turned ink black above the hills, stars scattered thinly behind a drift of clouds. Wade sat on an old tree stump. Clara, on the ground across from him, knees drawn to her chest, blanket wrapped tight. Neither of them had spoken since supper. The silence, once awkward, now felt like a pause between heartbeats' unspoken permission to simply be. The night air was cooler than usual, and the wind carried the scent of dried mesquite and distant earth. Clara stared into the fire. Its warmth brushed her cheeks. The heat reminded her of something far less kind. She took a breath, held it, then let it out. "I used to live in a town called Carter's Hill," she began, her voice rough but steady. "Not much left of it now, just char and bones." Wade didn't move, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, quiet and patient. Clara's fingers toyed with a frayed edge of the blanket. "My husband was a rail worker. Good man, quiet, like you. We had a boy, Eli. He was 6. Had a cowlick that never laid flat, no matter how much spit or soap I used." She gave a weak smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Then came the dry season, the kind that cracks soil and shortens tempers. Folks got desperate. One night, some drunk at the saloon knocked over a lantern. Wood buildings, dry wind. You can guess the rest. Her hand stilled. I ran back in, thought maybe I could get Eli out. But it was too late. The heat hit me like a wall. I crawled out half-blind, my back scorched, lungs full of smoke. Her voice broke there. Wade's grip on his tin mug tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "After the fire," she continued, softer now. No one wanted reminders. "They rebuilt half the town, left the rest behind. People looked at me like I'd dragged death in with me. Whispers started, said I'd gone mad, that I'd run and left them behind, that maybe I'd lit the fire myself." She met Wade's gaze across the flames. They needed someone to blame, and I was too tired to fight. Wade's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a gate easing open in the wind. Clara looked away quickly. I drifted after that. Did work where I could. Took help when I had to. Learned to be quiet. Learned to disappear. The fire popped, sending a spark skyward. She swallowed hard, but I never forgot the sound of his laugh. Or the way Eli used to crawl into bed on cold mornings and tangle himself in the blankets like a pup. I remember their voices, but sometimes I wonder, how long until even that fades? She blinked fast, wiping the corner of her eye with her sleeve. A moment passed, then another, and then quietly. Without a word, Wade reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded handkerchief, worn but clean. He held it out to her. Clara hesitated, then took it. Their fingers touched, brief, unplanned. But it was the first time he'd offered more than space, more than silence. And in that instant, something soft passed between them. Not forgiveness, not comfort, recognition. Two people broken in different ways, acknowledging the fracture. She dabbed her eyes, then looked down at the cloth in her hand. "It's been a long time since anyone gave me something without expecting it back," she whispered. Wade didn't answer, but he didn't look away. The firelight reflected in his eyes, turning them amber and warm, so unlike the man who'd stood on his porch days ago with walls built sky high. Clara took a slow breath. "If you still want," she said, voice trembling at the edges, "I'll keep my word." She looked up. "I'll be your wife." The words weren't desperate this time. Not a bargain. Not a plea. Just a truth laid bare. A choice, gently offered. Wade didn't move, didn't answer, but his expression softened barely, like the wind had smoothed a hard edge of stone. And across the fire, with only night to hear, something unspoken settled between them, quiet, flickering, fragile, like hope, or the start of something that might grow, if given enough light. Just when you begin to heal, the past always knows how to find you. It was late morning when the stranger rode in. The wind had settled, and the air felt too still, like the land itself was holding its breath. Clara was out near the chicken coop, mending the edge of a wire fence,
her hands steady now, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. She didn't hear the rider at first. It was the horse that Wade noticed, a tall bay mare with a white blaze, unfamiliar hooves stirring up old dust on a road rarely used. He stepped down from the porch, wiped his hands on his trousers, and watched as the man approached. Dust clung to the stranger's coat. His hat was pulled low, but not low enough to hide the smirk on his face when he spotted Wade. "Nice place you've got here," he called, reining in the mare. Wade nodded once. "Don't get many visitors." The man chuckled. "I ain't visiting you." That's when Clara turned. She froze mid-step, a handful of wire slack in her grip. Her breath caught in her throat as the man dismounted and looked directly at her. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, voice loud and sharp. "Clara Mae Hutchins, thought you were dead in a ditch somewhere." She didn't answer, didn't blink. Wade glanced at her, then back to the man. He stepped down onto the dirt, moving closer. "I don't think she's expecting company," Wade said, his voice low. The man scoffed. "She and I go way back. Back in Carter's Hill, she used to keep company with half the saloon, if you know what I mean." Clara's face drained of color. Her shoulders stiffened. She was always good at making herself needed. The man went on, eyes never leaving hers. "That's what she does. Finds a place to crawl into. Gets a man to feel sorry enough to feed her. Maybe warm his bed while she's at it." Wade didn't flinch, didn't move, but his jaw tightened. Still, he said nothing. Clara finally found her voice. Quiet, even. "Why are you here?" Billy Haskins took off his hat and wiped his brow dramatically. "News travels. Clara." "Word was, a woman matching your description showed up around these parts. Thought maybe I'd do the right thing, bring you back where you belong." "I don't belong to anyone," she said, though her hands trembled. Billy stepped closer. Too close. "You don't belong anywhere," he hissed, low enough for only her to hear. "You think this fella's going to keep you around when he finds out who you really are?" She looked past him, to Wade. His eyes met hers. Steady, watching, waiting. But he didn't speak. He didn't step forward, didn't pull her behind him, didn't tell Billy to leave. And that silence, so steady, so constant, cut deeper than any insult. Clara blinked. It shouldn't have surprised her. He hadn't promised her anything, but for the first time, she wished he had. Billy smirked, sensing the shift. "You see, you still don't matter." "Clara, not really." She turned, walked back to the shed, closed the door, and sat down. Her hands shook as she began folding what little she had, a spare blouse, the tin cup, the handkerchief Wade had given her. She pressed it gently, smoothing the creases with her palm. Outside, she could still hear the murmurs, the hoofbeats retreating, and then silence, the kind that once felt safe. Now it felt hollow. She didn't cry. She was too tired. But as she slipped the blanket into her satchel, she paused, looked around the small space, at the worn boards, the single hook on the wall, the floor where she'd laid, burning with fever, the bench where she'd sat beside him under firelight. She took a breath, then walked outside. Wade stood near the barn, alone now. She didn't wait for an explanation, didn't ask for one. "I'll leave by morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Clara nodded once, turned, and went back inside. The stars came out early that night. And somewhere out beyond the ridge, a mare's hooves faded into the dark. But Wade didn't go inside. He stayed by the barn, staring at the shed. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of a choice not made. Sometimes, the heart speaks loudest when you fear it's too late. Wade couldn't sleep.
The house felt colder than usual, though the fire still burned low in the hearth. He sat at the edge of the bed, boots still on, elbows resting on his knees. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that left no space for forgetting. Outside, the wind had picked up. Dry branches tapped the window like fingers unsure whether to knock. He kept seeing her face. Not the first time he saw her broken and begging at the gate, not even at the fire, when she spoke of ash and loss. But earlier that day, when Billy Haskins said her name like it was dirt, when she looked at Wade not for protection, not for saving, but for something smaller, for belief, and he'd given her none. He had stood there, still, mute, afraid. He hadn't been afraid of Billy, or scandal, or truth. He'd been afraid of what it would cost to care again, because caring meant risk. Caring meant opening something up he'd boarded shut. And when you'd already buried a wife and a son, you didn't go digging into that kind of pain again unless you were ready to bleed. But now she was gone, or soon would be, and Wade couldn't breathe through the weight of it. He stood, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside. The night air slapped him awake, cool, damp, thick with the scent of sage and regret. He saddled his horse in silence, no lantern, no sound, just instinct, and rode out. The trail was faint in the dark, but he knew the land, every bend, every rise, every grove of trees that might hold someone curled up against the cold. She couldn't have gone far. She had no horse, no money, no map, just her feet. And whatever strength she hadn't already spent on surviving, he found her near a shallow clearing where the morning mist had begun to gather in ghostly threads across the grass. She sat beneath a leaning cottonwood, her shawl pulled tight, knees drawn up. She didn't look surprised to see him, only tired. Wade dismounted slowly. He didn't speak right away. The horse snorted softly behind him, as if urging him to say something, anything. Clara turned her face to the side, avoided his gaze. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, voice quiet. He took a step closer. "I almost didn't," he admitted. She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "I don't blame you." Wade looked down at his boots, then out across the dark field. "I've spent a long time learning how to keep things out," he said. "Pain, memory, people." He paused, but the thing about building walls is, eventually, you forget how to open a door. Clara said nothing. He stepped forward again, kneeling beside her in the damp grass. "I didn't stop Billy," he said, "didn't say a word. Not because I believed him, not because I didn't care." She looked at him then, eyes red-rimmed but searching. "I was afraid," Wade said. "Afraid that if I stepped forward, if I told him to go to hell, I'd be admitting something I haven't admitted in years." She blinked, waiting. He swallowed hard. "That I want you to stay. That I care if you do." The words hung in the night air, heavier than the dew. "I've already lost a family once," he whispered, "and I told myself I wouldn't survive losing another." He reached for her hand, not forcefully, gently, like you'd reach for something that might break if touched too quick. She didn't pull away, but she didn't speak either. The silence stretched, not like before, not brittle or strained, just full, full of unsaid things, of what-ifs and almosts. Then Clara turned her hand in his. Her fingers wrapped around his, not tight, not loose, just enough. And for the first time since he'd buried Thomas, Wade felt his breath steady. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away.
They sat together beneath the cottonwood tree, wrapped not in promises, but in presence. The night held them quietly, and though no answer had been spoken, not every kind of yes needed words. No one chooses to stay in the cold, unless what's waiting in the warmth is even colder. The night was still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Clara and Wade sat beneath the leaning cottonwood tree, their backs to the wide stretch of land, their silence wrapped tighter than the blanket she clutched around her shoulders. The earth had cooled, and a faint frost had begun to creep over the grass. But neither of them moved. Not away, not closer. Just still. Clara pulled the shawl tighter, her fingers numb. But she didn't shiver. She had known colder places, colder people. And sometimes, cold came not from the wind, but from eyes that looked through you, from hands that only touched when they wanted something in return. Wade sat beside her, his knees drawn up, hands clasped loosely between them. He'd said what he needed to say, that he cared, that he'd been afraid, and now he waited, but not with expectation, with acceptance. She turned toward him, the shadows cutting soft lines across her face. In the dim light of the moon, her expression looked carved from some older grief. "I've been a lot of things in my life." She began quietly. A wife, a mother, a burden, a woman passed from place to place like bad luck. Wade said nothing, just listened. She drew a breath. Slow, but I never wanted to be a charity. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't stay just because someone feels sorry for me. Wade, I can't live in a house where the air is thick with unspoken debt. I've already done that. I know how it feels to smile through it, pretend it's shelter, when it's just another prison. She stopped. The words sat heavy in the air. Wade stared ahead, his face unreadable. Then he turned, eyes steady. I don't pity you, he said, not even for a second. Clara looked away. You brought me back. I didn't bring you back because you're weak, he said. I brought you back because I'm tired of being the only ghost in that house. She frowned, not quite understanding. I walk through my own life like I'm already dead, he continued. I feed the animals, fix the fences, light the fire, and every night I lie in bed wondering how long I can keep going before the silence eats me from the inside out. He shifted slightly, not closer, just enough to glance at her without forcing it. When you came, he said, I remembered what it felt like to care whether someone else breathed. Clara's breath hitched. Wade took off his hat and held it in his lap. His fingers fidgeted along the rim, rough calluses against worn felt. I don't need a wife, he said gently. I don't need someone to cook or clean or warm a bed. He paused. I need someone to stay because they want to, not because they owe me, not because they think I expect something. Just stay. Clara was quiet. Her eyes dropped to the hem of her skirt, fingers twisting a loose thread. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I don't know how to be something worth staying for. Wade didn't answer with words. He simply reached out, slow, deliberate, and laid his hand on her shoulder. Not firm, not possessive, just present. She tensed at first. Then, after a long second, her shoulders dropped. The cottonwood leaves rustled gently above them, a breeze curling through the low branches like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how to expand. Wade's hand remained. No pressure, no pull, just warmth in the cold. After a long while, Clara turned her face toward him. Her voice, when it came, was fragile. I'm not ready to promise anything.
He nodded once. "That's all right. I'm not even sure I know how to stay." She added. Wade looked at her, then truly looked, into the corners of her grief, the exhaustion in her bones, the flicker of something deep in her that hadn't yet gone out. "Then, stay just for tomorrow," he said, "and we'll see what the next day brings." She blinked, then gave a faint, shaky smile. "Tomorrow's a start," she whispered. They sat like that until the first light crept into the sky. The frost shimmered across the field like silver dust scattered by a giant's hand. They stood together. Wade offered her his coat. She accepted it, and in silence, side by side, they began the slow walk back to the ranch, not as man and wife, not yet even as friends, but as two souls, too tired to run, and maybe, just maybe, willing to walk through the next day together. Behind them, the tree stood tall, its roots sunk deep into the earth. Ahead, the house waited, still, silent, and for the first time, no longer just his. It wasn't a wedding, but it was the first time the coffee was shared with a smile. The house had never felt this quiet. Not the cold quiet of grief, not the hollow quiet of loneliness, but the soft, expectant kind, like the air itself was holding its breath for what came next. Clara woke before the rooster called, though her body begged for more rest. The unfamiliar mattress beneath her back, the wooden beams above her head, the scent of dry pine and old quilts, they all reminded her, in every small way, that she was no longer alone. Not quite. She washed her face at the basin, combed her hair back with her fingers, and pulled on the dress she'd scrubbed by lantern light the night before. It still smelled faintly of firewood and soap. Downstairs, the kitchen was dim, but not cold. The coals from last night's fire still held warmth. She fed them with fresh kindling and waited. Her fingers curled around the kettle. There was no grand gesture in the making of coffee, no applause, no ceremony. But there was rhythm. There was steadiness. She measured the grounds by feel 2 heaping spoons for strength, 1 extra for the day ahead. She boiled the water slow, watching steam curl up like a whispered prayer. Her hand trembled just once when she reached for the mugs. She paused, then took down 2. Outside the window. Wade moved through morning like he had every other day, boots crunching frost-bitten dirt, reins in one hand, the other rubbing the mare's flank in wide, practiced strokes. He didn't look toward the house, but Clara watched him through the glass. She watched the way he led the animal, the way he checked the gate latch twice, the way he moved like a man used to talking more with animals than people. She poured the coffee, set the mugs down, then sat at the table, not near the edge, not in the shadows, directly across from where he always sat. By the time Wade entered, shaking dust from his coat, the room was filled with warmth, not just from the stove, but from the simple scent of coffee and something more subtle. Familiarity? Maybe. Or hope. He stepped through the doorway, paused. Their eyes met. Clara's hand stayed around her cup, fingers tight, but she didn't look away. Wade nodded once, a slow, quiet gesture, then walked to the chair and sat opposite her. For a while, neither of them spoke. They drank. The kitchen creaked. The kettle hissed. The world outside carried on like it always had. But inside this room, something small had shifted. He refilled her mug before she could ask. She passed him the sugar without being told. He stirred his coffee with the same spoon she'd used, and neither of them flinched at the closeness. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was care. It was presence. It was a seat at the table that hadn't been set for anyone in years. Clara rose without a word and rinsed her hands again in the basin. She dried them slow, making sure every drop was gone before returning. She didn't ask permission. She didn't hesitate. She simply sat again. Wade watched her. Not with expectation, not with uncertainty, just with quiet attention. Her posture had changed, not stiff, not guarded, just steady. She folded her hands on the table, and for the first time, he did too. His fingers brushed hers barely. Not to hold, not to claim, just to be near. And she didn't move away. She didn't smile, not fully. But her lips parted in a breath that was almost lighter than the one before. "This coffee's stronger than what I'm used to," she said, voice low. Wade raised an eyebrow. "You complaining?" She shook her head. "No, just noticing." He gave the faintest grin. "It's meant to keep a man standing after fence repairs." She nodded, sipped again. "I think it might keep me upright through winter." Silence followed, not the kind that begs to be broken. The kind that feels earned. And when Clara stood to clear the mugs, Wade didn't stop her. He simply stood. Two people. Once strangers, now moving in the same rhythm, not bound by vows, but by choice. And for the first time, the kitchen no longer felt like just his. It felt like theirs. She came with nothing. He had nothing to offer, but somehow they built a home. The seasons had begun to turn again. Late spring softened the edges of the land that once felt like stone. The wind no longer bit. It brushed warm, dust-laced, but kinder somehow. The air smelled of juniper and open space. The ranch had not changed much. The barn still creaked when the wind blew west. The kitchen windows still stuck in their frames. The roof still needed patching before summer rains came. But something inside had shifted, subtle, steady. There were 2 coats now hanging by the door. 2 sets of boots caked with the same dry mud. 2 cups placed on the table every morning before either of them said a word. Wade and Clara moved around each other with the kind of ease that only time and effort could build. No more second-guessing, no more flinching from silence. They filled their days with small tasks, shared glances, and the occasional story passed between fence repairs or bread rising by the fire. They had not spoken the word love. They had not spoken of marriage, either not since that first night at the gate, because now none of it felt owed. It simply was. Clara had started writing again, simple things, grocery lists, receipts, her name, practiced in careful script on the backs of feed sacks. Sometimes she'd leave little notes. "Don't forget the south gate. Coffee's hot. Don't let the stew burn this time." Wade never wrote back. But every note disappeared, and every task was done. One morning, Clara caught him kneeling beside the herb boxes she'd planted on the windowsill, fingering the leaves like he wasn't sure if they were real. "They're growing," she'd said gently. He'd nodded. "Guess they're staying, too." That was the closest they came to talking about her roots. Until the fence. It was Clara's idea to fix the east fence, the one that had leaned for years and split in the last storm. She'd suggested it over supper, casually, almost as if she didn't care. But Wade knew better. "You thinking of putting animals out that way?" he'd asked. She'd shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just want something out there that says this land's still alive." He didn't argue. They started the next morning, digging holes, setting posts, hauling rails. It was backbreaking work, the kind of labor that settled into your bones, but Clara didn't complain. She matched him swing for swing, shovel for shovel. Wade offered to take over 12 times. She shook him off every time. By dusk, they'd driven the last post. Wade stood with his hands on his hips, sweat running down his temples, dust streaked across his shirt. Clara leaned on the shovel, breathing hard, her braid coming undone at the ends.
The fence stretched straight behind them, clean, solid, proud. Wade turned toward her, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, he smiled without it hurting. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small carved sign. Nothing fancy, just a piece of cedar he'd whittled between chores. Burned into the wood, in uneven but clear letters, was one word: home. He walked to the first post and nailed it in place. Clara didn't speak. Her throat tightened. Wade looked back at her. His voice was low, certain. Welcome home, Clara. That was the moment. Not the coffee, not the porch chairs, not the shared meals or laughter over burnt stew. This was the vow, silent, unspoken, but written in dirt and sweat and cedar wood. Clara stepped forward, her eyes shimmering but dry. I didn't think I'd ever hear that word again, she said softly. Then I guess we better say it often. Wade replied. They walked back to the house slowly. No rush, no storm behind them anymore. Later that evening, Clara stood alone on the porch, her fingers curled around her mug. The coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. She watched Wade near the barn, storing tools, brushing down the mare. His movements were familiar now, not just known, but belonged to her world. This wasn't borrowed time. She wasn't a guest or a shadow. She was here, rooted. She looked out over the land, the fields slowly waking, the hills rising steady and patient, the wind carrying the faint scent of horses and soil. And for the first time in a long, long time, she wasn't searching for a place to go. She was already there. The porch creaked gently beneath her feet. Behind her, the kitchen light glowed warm. There were biscuits in the oven, Wade's coat on the chair, and peace. Not the loud kind, the kind that comes when you finally stop running, when you stop proving, when you simply are. She smiled to herself, then turned back inside, closing the door behind her. In life, we often believe that worth must be proven, that love must be earned, and that a place in someone's world requires perfection or a spotless past. But Clara and Wade remind us that healing doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins in the quiet, in the choosing, in the staying. We all carry something: grief, shame, silence. Some carry it visibly, others hide it deep within. But sometimes, the most courageous act isn't surviving alone. It's learning to let someone in, even when it hurts. This story teaches us that a home is not a house. It's not a promise made out of fear. It's the slow, steady decision to show up day after day for yourself, and maybe one day for someone else too. No matter how broken we feel, there's always room for grace. And sometimes, the second chance we never thought we deserved is the one that saves us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through dust, silence, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe for more soulful stories from the Wild West. Your support helps keep these echoes alive. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep listening for the stories the wind still carries.